Welcome to the Note Investor Podcast. We'll guide you through the ups and downs of note investing and teach you all about the nitty-gritty details of the business that other people won't talk about. Your host, Dan Deppen, is a former aerospace engineer and product manager who transitioned away from cubicle life to full-time note investing in 2018. Our website is www.fusionnotes.com, where you can subscribe to this podcast, comment, and find links to other information on note investing.
All right, hi everyone. Welcome to the Note Investor Podcast. And in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the software tools that I use for note investing. Now, obviously the main purpose of, sharing this stuff is to help other note investors, because there may be some tools in here that you haven't heard of or you're not familiar with, or maybe there are ways to use them that you haven't used them before. The other thing is I'm really interested in hearing what tools you folks recommend. So if there's something that you like to use for your notes business that you didn't hear me mention, please drop me an email at dan@fusionnotes.com or leave a comment on the YouTube video or on the blog, because I'm always looking for new tools to try out. In fact, over this holiday break, I really spent a lot of time kind of looking at my entire business top to bottom and figuring out what I can improve to save myself time, to make things more accurate. And I've done this whole deep dive on software tools, and there's some things in here too that I am that I'll talk about in today's podcast that I'm in the process of transitioning to, and there's some other tools that I'm going to be checking out and looking at a little closer. I mean, it's interesting with software, right? I used to work for Oracle, and there were a lot of folks, at Oracle or customers you talk to, when it came to software, they would get like, it was kind of like religion or politics to them oftentimes, right? Where they're like, I like this software and I hate that one, and I don't care what changes over time. This is how I roll. Like I've known other people who are like that with cars, right? Where they like a certain brand of car and they just never change, even if they bought like 3 lemons in a row. Whereas I've always been, whatever it is, software or like golf clubs, I'm always willing to change if I think something works better. For example, like for those that know me, I'm a big golfer, and I've got TaylorMade irons and Callaway woods and a ping putter and Titleist balls. So basically I just use whatever I think is going to work the best for me at the time. And I do kind of the same thing with software. So some of these tools I'll talk about too, I'm actually in the process of switching, and if something comes along and it works better, I'm always willing to switch. So if you folks have feedback on stuff, I'm always interested in hearing it, but I wanted to share some of the stuff I'm using now, and then some of the other stuff I'm looking at, because there's some things in here you'll be familiar with. There's some other things in here you probably haven't heard of yet. So I think this will be a good topic to go over. So I'll start with the essential tools that I use. So these are kind of like my core ones that I'm using all the time. And the first one is Pipedrive. So that's my CRM. So for any notes business, you are going to need, well, there are really 2 things you need. One is a CRM, which is a basically customer relationship manager. A CRM is just a piece of software that contains all of your contacts and lets you get a hold of them. But then the other thing I use Pipedrive for in addition, and it's not really what Pipedrive is intended for, but I kind of bastardize it to make it work, and that's project management. So that's tracking deals, setting reminders and follow-ups to do different things, keeping notes on deals and other things, scheduling tasks. So this gets tricky in Pipedrive because, Pipedrive is built as a CRM, but what's kind of cool about it is it's very customizable, right? And so I've been able to kind of customize it to do some of these project management type tasks. And when I set it up for that, I used Adam Adams, a couple years ago now, I think, put out some good videos on setting up Pipedrive for notes business. And I started with his videos originally, but then over time I really changed things a lot once I figured out how I wanted to run my notes business. And I've stuck with Pipedrive for a few years. I mean, one of the things I like about it is the way that it integrates with email. So I use G Suite, and one of the things that Pipedrive does that's pretty cool is within Pipedrive, when you pull up a contact, it'll integrate with your email. And so you can see all the emails you've exchanged with that contact all from within Pipedrive. You can also send emails directly from Pipedrive, which is pretty nice. But then the other feature, and maybe I'll do another video. If you guys are interested in this, let me know. But maybe I'll do another podcast where I kind of deep dive on how I use Pipedrive because I don't really have time in this podcast to go through it all. But it has a Gmail extension that you can download. And what's cool about it is, like, let's say I'm in email and I get an email from somebody new and it's a contact that I want to save in my CRM. There's a little side panel you can get for Pipedrive. You can say create it as a contact. And then right from that panel, you can add in some of their information. You can set an activity. Like, let's say it's a new asset manager. They email me back, right? So within Gmail, I can add them to my CRM. I can set what Pipedrive calls an activity, which is kind of just a task. But I can set an activity in Pipedrive to follow up with them a week or 2 weeks later or whatever makes sense. I can also add notes. So if I'm talking to them on the phone, I can throw notes in there and do that all from email. So it's pretty seamless back and forth between the CRM and email. But the project management part is where it's kind of a challenge. And I've made it work. What I do works. Like I said, I'd be willing to share how I do that. It's far from ideal, and I'm looking at some additional tools to help with that. The other one that's one that's maybe the most popular for note investors is a different piece of software called Podio. Now, Podio I have not used before, so I'm not an expert on that. But from what I understand about Podio, that's designed as project management software, so that does the project management piece real well. And the folks that use Podio, I don't know if they can also use that as the CRM or if they have to use something else. Like I said, I'm not sure. That's a piece of software I haven't actually used myself, but I mention it because I know a lot of note investors use it. There's even another software product out there, and I can't remember the name of the gentleman who makes it, but it's called NPL Manager, which from what he had explained to me is basically a skin for Podio. So from what I understand about NPL Manager is basically Podio, but with all the customizations set up for a notes business. So maybe I'll have to have him on the podcast sometime. But I've not used NPL Manager either. The other one, a lot of folks, not a lot, but some folks uses Infusionsoft. Infusionsoft, from what I understand, is extremely powerful and extremely expensive. Like I think hundreds of dollars a month, if I'm not mistaken. And then another one that I'm actually considering that I'm going to talk about later in the podcast is called ClaritySoft that I've had some people recommend. These weren't note investors that recommended it, but ClaritySoft looks interesting because it has different modules and it looks like it might handle more of these hybrid tasks. But if you look at the world of CRMs, there are at least 300 plus CRMs out there. Zoho, HubSpot, Zendesk are some big ones. Salesforce.com is like the Ferrari of CRMs. When I worked for large companies, that's what we used. Well, it was a larger startup company that I worked for, but that's very expensive and probably very overkill for a notes business. So that's the CRM part. That's really, maybe my most vital piece of software that I use because it contains so much critical data. All right, now the next one is moving on to is cloud storage. So I use DropBox for cloud storage. I've got a business account because I've got an assistant that works for me and some other things. And with the business account, they require you to have 3 seats, and it ends up costing me $45 a month, which is very expensive. And that's something I'm looking to change because that's really too much to spend on cloud storage. That $45 a month does get me 5 terabytes of data, but 5 terabytes is a phenomenal amount of data. I mean, unless you're making just boatloads of video and saving them at high resolution, that is a lot of data. So for an individual, particularly an individual with a notes business, you're never gonna come near that. So I'm in the process of shifting some of my things over to Google Drive. Um, and for my email, I have a G Suite Basic account, and that comes with 30 gigabytes of storage per user, and that's a lot of storage. I'll outstrip that, at some point. And actually, I may have more than that in Drop. I'm not actually sure what I have in Dropbox, but I'm in the middle of moving some things over to Google Drive, and coming this early part of 2020, I may just move everything over to Google Drive at some point. Google Drive is cheaper for one, and the main thing is it just makes it easier to share files. You don't get into this whole business of, a Windows type environment where if you're creating links to files and documents and then you move the file or you change the folder structure, then all of a sudden all the pointers get broken. Part of the reason I use Dropbox is just I've had a lot of experience with it and I'm kind of comfortable with it. I mean, that's a lot of the reason why I use some of my software tools, and other people do that as well. It's actually not a bad reason, but as Google Drive has come along, I think it might be time to look to something that's a little easier to use, a little more robust, and a little less expensive. But there are a ton of cloud storage options out there. There's Microsoft OneDrive. There's Box that I used at a company I worked at once that I don't really recommend. It's like a clunkier version of Dropbox in my opinion, but there's a bunch of them out there. The one thing I will say is whatever the hell you do, don't just put all your stuff on your local hard drive on your laptop or computer. People do this all the time, and I don't want to use too colorful language, but it's really, really dumb to do that. And I apologize for one of the people that do this, but I strongly urge you to get at least a copy of your data on some kind of cloud storage system, because it's so easy to drop and break a laptop or have it get stolen or have it get broken or just have your hard drive die. And your data, especially your business data, is just so valuable. You can't afford to lose it. And so there's really no excuse in this day and age for not having it in some kind of a cloud-based solution. And because that way too, you're also protected if you accidentally delete data or something happens. These companies all have ways to recover data and pull things back. Whereas if you just have it on your hard drive, you're really on your own. And I'm sure we've all heard horror stories of people who have had hard drives die or laptops get stolen and lose lots of data. But your data is too valuable to do that. So whatever you do, don't just store it locally. You can have a copy locally as a backup. That's not a bad idea, but don't make that your only copy. You want to get it off and somewhere else. And it's just amazing how many people don't do that. Even like when I worked for Oracle, talking to IT professionals, there were ones that did horrifically stupid things. I mean, there's no way to candy coat it. Make sure you protect your data, please, for the love of God. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox there. Now the next one is my web hosting for my Fusion Notes website. So I use Bluehost for my hosting, and I started using Bluehost over 10 years. I think it was in 2009 I started using Bluehost for another website that's actually still up, and I still use it for. And I used Bluehost originally because a friend recommended it. It's pretty cheap, pretty reliable, and it's proven to be that way throughout. Now for my website, I use WordPress for my website. So if you have a Bluehost account or a GoDaddy account or whatever, there are a million different web hosting companies out there. Bluehost is just the one that I happen to use, but there are a bunch of others. But if you want to run your website on WordPress, you can run WordPress for free. You can download various themes and then just set up your website. Now, I had created some web, before I originally set up Fusion Notes a couple years ago, I had created some other websites several years before that. And so I had a little bit of experience with WordPress. It's really pretty easy to use. But I had done it before, and I may be a little more handy with some of that stuff than some folks. If you're like, I really don't like computers and this isn't easy for me, then there are some other kind of what I call like simple website builders you can use, like Squarespace is a big one. Um, there are some others. There's one, what's it called? Wix, I think, where they're going to cost you a little more to host, but they've got some pretty simplified setups and templates where it can be easy to put your website together. But the way I kind of recommend doing is what I did, just use WordPress and set it up yourself if you're willing to wrestle with that. It's really not too bad all in all. And what I like about having built mine myself is now when I need to go update it or add a page, I know how everything works, right? So it's real easy. Because the other option you have is to hire someone to build it for you. So one thing you could do is have a hoster like Bluehost and then hire someone to set up WordPress for you. That's not a bad idea, especially if you don't want to spend hours figuring it out yourself. But if you do that, I would just urge you to make sure that you have them teach you how to update it. You just don't want to get stuck where you're dependent on some developer to make just basic updates to your website. Because I'm always making changes to mine, uploading case studies. I recently just did an overhaul of it, of the Fusion Notes website about a month ago, where I installed a new theme and I added a new page for the Fusion Income Fund and added a page for the Systematic Due Diligence course and added some case studies and changed around some other things. It's just nice to be able to go in there and do all that stuff myself, or if I find an error later on, I can go in and just tweak it. I think it just makes your life easier if you can go in and make some simple adjustments when you need to without having to go get a hold of somebody to do it or pay somebody to do it every time. So that's my website. Now, email, that's obviously a big one, and there are a lot of free options for that. I use Google G Suite, and that is for a G Suite basic account, it's $6 per user per month. And I've got 2 users because I've got an assistant who works for me that I want to have a fusionnotes.com email address. So even if you are using Google G Suite, you can connect it to your other domain. So I have, even though my email is run through G Suite, it is connected to Bluehost, which has the Fusion Notes domain. So, all of my emails come back and forth from dan@fusionnotes.com, even though it's actually Google under the covers that are running it. You can have the hosting companies run your Gmail directly. In fact, originally I did have Bluehost just running my email. I switched that a little over a year ago when I ran into some really big problems with my email that almost drove me insane. And I don't know what was going on. I'm not even sure if it was a Bluehost issue or not. But it was the craziest thing I've actually ever seen. So some, but not all of my emails were not getting sent. Like they would show up in my sent email folder, but not actually go. And it was intermittent. And it took me like 3 weeks to even figure out that I had a problem. Like I had all these people who just wouldn't respond, and I was getting mad at different people, wondering why they wouldn't respond. And what made it really insidious was it wasn't tied to the person. So like if I traded 5 emails with a person over the course of a week, like some of them would go through and some of them would not. So I would get emails back from people and I'd be like, well, wait a minute. I already told them that in the other email, but I didn't know that they didn't get the other email. And I'm thinking like, what's wrong with these folks? And I thought I was taking crazy pills for a while. I ended up switching everything over to G Suite. The problem finally went away. That was a dark time in my business because it was just, that almost made me really crazy. So G Suite is one option. You can just make a free Gmail account. I don't really recommend that though. I mean, I think it's best if your email comes from a business domain. So whether mine is at fusionnotes.com or, whatever domain you're using for your website, for your notes business, I think it just looks a lot more professional, especially when you're emailing with asset managers, to have it come from your web address. When I see Gmail addresses, it means kind of one or two things. It could mean that it's just an individual who's buying stuff for their self-directed IRA, and that's totally cool. That makes sense. Like if you're just buying a couple notes for your self-directed IRA, you don't need to set up a whole notes business and worry about this stuff. But the other thing it signals a lot of times is joker brokers. Whenever somebody comes out of the woodwork that I've never heard of before, and they say they have a bunch of notes for sale, they often have an @gmail.com email and are often a joker broker. So especially if you're emailing asset managers, it's best to have your own domain. And please try to, that there's also, I also see a lot of Hotmail and AOL email accounts, and those work just fine. The problem with those is it kind of sends us, right, wrong, or indifferent, it kind of sends a signal to people that, you set up your account in the 90s and, it kind of makes you look kind of like a dinosaur, sort of. So if you have to use a free email service, I would recommend Gmail or something like that. But just, if you're running kind of more of a serious notes business, I would highly recommend having some kind of custom domain to go with it. All right, now email marketing. I use MailChimp for this, and there are a bazillion email marketing software tools that you can use. There's no particular magic to MailChimp. I like it. I liked it originally because their free plan that I was on when I started was pretty good deal. And I should have looked this up before I started recording this, but I don't recall what the limits are on their free plan now, but they're pretty generous overall, assuming they haven't changed it too radically. They've really spiffed up the interface over the years. It's very, very easy to use. And if you've never done email marketing or something that, if this is new to you, you'll be kind of amazed at some of the cool things you can do with it. I mean, a lot of these features, I think nowadays, pretty much all the modern email marketing tools have. Like for example, like one of the big ones is just being able to schedule emails in advance. So when I send out emails to my newsletter, I typically do it on Sunday nights, and sometimes I end up writing the emails like right before I send them. But if it's a week where I'm a little more on the ball, I usually get that teed up several days in advance, and then within MailChimp, I can just schedule that to go out when I want. You can also do some automation, and you can send additional emails based on what the recipients do or don't do. Like, so for example, and basically all email tools do this. So as you're receiving emails from different vendors and different things, you may not even realize this is going on, but usually they come with these tracking pixels, and email marketers can usually detect whether you opened an email or not, or if you did open an email, whether you clicked on anything or not. So you can do things like say, okay, send an email to my list, and then all the people who clicked the link sometime later send them this other email, or all the people who didn't click send them this other email, or all the people who didn't open it send it to them again. You can get really crazy with a lot of the information, and again, you can tee all this up in advance so you don't have to do this manually. It can really save you a lot of time. The other thing I like about MailChimp is it can automatically post to social media. So I have a Twitter account, Facebook account for Fusion Notes, and when I send out my newsletter, I have, MailChimp will automatically post my newsletter or a link to it on Twitter, and then a link to it on Facebook. So it really makes my life a lot easier. And then you can do a lot of things with segmenting lists, and I'll have different lists in there, one for my regular newsletter, one for asset managers, and then I've got another one that I call my preferred investor email list. So, people who have contacted me and are interested in, learning more about deals and things like that. Then I have a shorter list that I'll send to when I have deals that are available. So that's email marketing. Again, there are lots of different tools available. I don't even know how much it matters which one you use, but I find MailChimp pretty intuitive, pretty simple. And then the big one has always been Microsoft Office. Word, PowerPoint, Excel have kind of been my mainstays for a long time. although I'm increasingly gravitating towards the Google Docs versus the Microsoft Docs. When Google came out, maybe like 10 years ago, I was doing my MBA at the time, and I remember looking at it and not thinking too much of Google at the time. So when this stuff first came out, it was fairly rudimentary. Um, but Google's come a long, long ways over the last 10 years. And the big thing is Google just makes it so easy to share, right? Like, again, you don't run into this whole problem in the Microsoft world of if I try to link to a document and then that document moves, so the folder structure changes, and all of a sudden everything's broken. Google is really smart about keeping everything straight. Now, at the end of the day, Excel, and as big an Excel guy as I am, continue to be, there are certain things I need Excel for. So I have some spreadsheets with certain macros that won't run on Google. They could be rebuilt to work on Google, but that would be a lot of work and I would have to figure that out. And I don't want to bother with doing that. So for example, I've got a spreadsheet that I use that ties into the Zillow API. So I can put in a list of property addresses and my API key from Zillow is in the spreadsheet. And then it will run some macros and it will actually go out to the Zillow website and pull data on those addresses. So I can pull Zillow values, I can pull other sorts of information on the property, like the number of bedrooms and things like that. And these days, I believe you can also do that within Google Sheets, but at this point, there's no point in recreating all of that stuff. So, Microsoft Office is still a big one for me, but it will be used less and less probably as time goes on. So those are my essential tools that I use. Now I'm going to talk about some of the secondary tools. So big one is Zoom that I use for meetings. And so I'll use this for, just one-on-one meetings with folks. I've used it for webinars. I'll use it for recording podcasts if I'm interviewing someone. I actually use another piece of software called Movavi, Movavi, for recording videos if it's just me on my laptop. I find that a little bit easier to use for some things. But Zoom is cool. Its free plan is pretty generous, limited one-on-one meetings. It does have some time limits on group meetings. If you do have to upgrade, it's $15 a month. And what I do is if I have something going on where I need to upgrade, I'll upgrade temporarily and then downgrade it to the free plan. The webinar, it's also got an add-on for webinars, which is pretty slick. It's $40 a month. So if I'm going to do a webinar, I'll turn it on for that month and then turn it off when I'm done. But there are a lot of other free options as well for meeting software. Google Hangouts is one people use a lot. GoToMeeting is one I used to see a lot, especially in the corporate world. I don't know how big that is nowadays. A lot of the free tools, and GoToMeeting is not a free tool, but a lot of the free meeting software tools that are out there are known for being pretty flaky, and I don't know how much that's changed, but Zoom is pretty stable and pretty reliable, so I like it. The other one I use a lot is called Calendly, and that's used for scheduling. So what Calendly does is it solves the problem of you want to have a call with someone or someone wants to have a call with me, and then there's this inevitable email back and forth where you go, hey, somebody says, hey, are you free next week? And it's like, yes, about Thursday. And they're like, what time? Okay, 11. Oh, wait, I can't do it at 11. I can do it at 1:30. Oh, I can't do it at 1:30, do it at 12. And what Calendly does is it cuts all of that stuff out. And so I can just give someone a link. So if I just send them a link that says www.calendly.com/fusion notes, it goes to my scheduling page. And then within my Calendly account, I can set up the times that I'm available for meetings. And what's great is it syncs with my Google Calendar. So when someone clicks my Calendly link and they go in to set a meeting, it'll look at the times that I've said were available, but then it's integrated with my Google Calendar. So if I already have a meeting scheduled at some time, it doesn't make it available to them. And so this is kind of nice. So if someone wants to have a call, I can just send them that link and say, pick out a time that works well for you. They pick out the time, and then we go from there. And the other cool thing about it is it will integrate with Zoom. So I also have it set up where, like if I'm recording with a podcast guest, I can send them that link. They can click the button to record a time for a podcast recording. And so when they pick out their time and that meeting gets created, it not only sends it to the calendars, but it creates a meeting within Zoom, schedules that, and then adds the Zoom link to the meeting invite. So now, it's really easy. You're not getting into this separate business of, okay, we're going to record this on Zoom. So I got to create the meeting within Zoom and then send you the link and this and that. It's all very simple, very streamlined, saves a lot of time. It's pretty cool. The one that I use off and on is VPN software, so a virtual private network, and I've used IP Vanish for this. A VPN is basically used to protect your privacy and protect your data, mainly when you're on public Wi-Fi. I mean, it also does it from home as well. So I do a lot of working out of coffee shops, and I don't travel as much as I used to, but it's also good when you're in airports and other places. Because somebody who really knows what you're doing, let's say you're logging into your bank or you're logging into something else, there are ways to sniff that data. And so using a VPN is a pretty good idea to protect yourself. It gets a little tricky sometimes because I've tried a few different VPNs. All of them are a little bit janky to some degree or another. Sometimes they can slow your performance down. Some websites don't like VPNs and they just won't let you go there if you're on a VPN. Like BiggerPockets is like that. So it's always kind of annoying because I spend a lot of time on BiggerPockets. And if I'm in a coffee shop connected to IP Vanish, and I try to go to BiggerPockets, it'll say, well, we're not letting you in unless you turn off the VPN. So they're not perfect, but they're not a bad idea. And they're relatively cheap. IP Vanish, if you sign up for a year, it's like $6.49 a month. So it's not too bad. Now, some of these other ones are ones that I use that you may not, depending on what you're doing. So I use one called Libsyn, Libsyn, and that's for podcast hosting. So that's where my podcasts get uploaded, and then from there get distributed to iTunes and other platforms. It's $15 a month. It's pretty cheap. I recently switched up my podcast production. So what I've been doing was I had a guy in the Philippines where I could just upload, when I would do a recording, I could just upload it to DropBox, and then he would do some editing, upload it to iTunes, upload it to Libsyn, get it distributed. And I've switched that over to a service called Pipedrive. And Pipedrive does basically the same thing, except it's more polished. They do it better. It's a little more expensive than what my guy in the Philippines ultimately cost, but much higher quality. And so I flipped over to Pipedrive, I think it was like episode 18 with David Putz, and they do some really nice transcriptions to put on a blog post on the website and some other stuff. Pipedrive is definitely not cheap, although it's actually not as expensive as some of the other similar services that are out there. But at the end of the day, it all gets hosted on Libsyn. Now, Pipedrive has their own hosting option, which is more expensive. I may switch to that at some point in the future, but right now I don't really see the need. The other one that I use that you probably don't is called Thinkific, Thinkific. And I use this for my systematic due diligence online training course. It's $49 a month, which is kind of middle of the road for these online training platforms. There are probably a million online training platforms out there. I looked at a bunch of them. Some of them are very expensive. Some of them are free, and mileage varies throughout. But this is one that you're probably not using. I find it very easy to use. Basically upload videos, upload spreadsheets for students to download, put all your content, and you can also design the website so the systematicduediligence.com website, instead of being run through Bluehost, is actually run through Thinkific, and they have their own editor, which is basically very similar kind of to WordPress, where you can make updates to that, and then you can do all kinds of cool things within Thinkific. So now some tools that I'm in the middle of incorporating. Now here's one you may not have heard of. It's called Outfunnel, and I've done some experiments with this. I've actually got the subscription turned off right at the moment, and this is email marketing. So Outfunnel would be kind of a replacement for MailChimp. But what Outfunnel does that's kind of cool is it integrates with Pipedrive. It also integrates with some other CRMs, but the people who created Outfunnel actually used to work for Pipedrive. They're actually over in Estonia. I talked to the one founder one time, and what they do is so you can send email, so it's kind of like MailChimp from that standpoint, but it's a more simplified MailChimp. So Outfunnel's a little newer. It doesn't have quite all the bells and whistles, but what it does that's kind of neat is it integrates with your CRM, so you can send very specific emails to them. So like for example, where I was testing it out was emails to asset managers, right? So if you think about it, let's think about communicating with asset managers, right? They're actually different kinds. I've got my kind of short list of folks that I have closed deals with before that are kind of my go-to sellers. There are other asset managers who maybe have sent me tapes of good stuff, but I haven't closed with them, but I kind of know I'm going to eventually. They're kind of like at that next tier where they're pretty hot leads. And then, there are other ones where I know they're an asset manager. I may have emailed them before, but they've never even really opened anything up or never done much. So they're asset managers that I want to send emails to on occasion, but I'm often going to communicate differently with someone that's, one of my go-to sellers versus somebody that I really don't even know very well. So what you can do in Pipedrive is, it's a CRM, so you're managing your contacts, but you can categorize them differently, but then you can send very specific emails depending on what category the contact is in. And because Pipedrive is so customizable, there's really no limit to how well you can refine things. And then the other thing that's kind of cool is I was talking earlier about how email software will do things like track opens and track clicks and track behavior. What Outfunnel does is it takes all of that data and it dumps it into Pipedrive. So if I get an email from an asset manager or want to get in contact with an asset manager and I pull them up in my CRM in Pipedrive, not only can I see all the data for them that I already had, and I mentioned the email integration, I can see our email chains, I can also get the email marketing data, right? Because one of the cool things that MailChimp does is, you can kind of see like, okay, which asset managers are opening my stuff and opening it several times and really interested, and which ones are not interested at all. With Outfunnel, I get all that data in one place within Pipedrive. The big challenge for me has always been between MailChimp and Pipedrive is having data in two different places. Some people refer to MailChimp as a CRM, but it's really not. It's just an email tool. So Outfunnel kind of brings those together. So I've done some experiments with it. I haven't really had the time yet to really dig into it, but I will at some point in 2020. It's a pretty cool tool. It's one I bet you haven't heard of before, but if you're already a Pipedrive user, it's something that's worth checking out. If you're not using Pipedrive, it's not going to do much for you. You're going to want to learn Pipedrive first before you start trying to tackle Outfunnel. The Confluence. This is a new one. So I've used this before in my corporate life. So Confluence is owned by a company called Atlassian, which makes another software called Jira, Jira, which is used mainly for tracking software requirements. That's where I knew Atlassian. And Atlassian has a bunch of other apps that they make. And one of them is called Confluence. And all Confluence really is it's just a thing that I think of as a way to build wikis or like an online repository. And I spent a lot of time over the winter break, and I'm not done with this yet, at least as of the time I'm recording this, building a library of standard operating procedures for my business. So one of the things that I found interesting is when I was working for large companies in the aerospace industry and at Oracle, everybody kind of looked down on their nose at standard operating procedures. It seemed like everybody always wanted to reinvent the wheel. But the last couple of years, I've spent a lot of time hanging out with entrepreneurs who have some really interesting businesses, not, generally notes or real estate related. And these are a lot of, kind of free. What's interesting to me is you look at some of these large companies, they were not that interested in standard operating procedures. I have some other friends who are these very like freewheeling entrepreneurs who like to, spend time living in Asia and working out of coffee shops and traveling here and traveling there, who are fanatical about creating standard operating procedures for the business. And this is another subject I should probably do a deep dive podcast on at some point. But by having those standard operating procedures drilled down, you can really make your business more efficient. You can optimize it. It also makes it easier to bring on help when you need it because everything is documented. So like I've got things right now in Confluence, like, how to do repeatable tasks within the business. So for example, you buy a new note, there's a new deal. How do you create the folder structure for that within DropBox? What do you do if you get a letter in the mail that there's a delinquent water bill on a contract for deed? How do you write up a case study after a deal has been exited? Once we buy a note, how do we document the chain of title and organize all of the collateral files? And there are other things you do periodically, like checking for missed payments, right? So once a month, you want to go through the portfolio and look at which payments came in and which ones didn't. And of course, then after that, that maps to potentially different loss mitigation actions depending on what happened. So, one of the great things about a notes business is that it's very rinse and repeat, unlike a lot of the engineering projects I worked on where you'd work on them for a year or two and then go do something completely different. You can reuse everything you do in notes. And so this is really going to be a big focus for me in the early part of 2020, getting these really dialed in. And really, I'm just kind of in the beginning stages of it. The other thing I like about it is how within Confluence, these pages get linked together, and it's very easy to link them to Google Docs. It's one of the things that's driving my shift over towards Google Docs, because I know if I build all these elaborate wikis and I put all these links to stuff in Google, I'm not going to destroy all the links if I happen to reorganize a file of a folder or rename something within Dropbox. So this is another thing I'll probably deep dive in on later, but I think it's really, really key, especially as my business scales. What I've been doing up to now works fine for 50, 60 notes. Is it going to work for 500? No way in hell. Not even close. So I know a lot of stuff's got to change. So this has really been a focus for me and something I'll probably be talking more about as the next year goes on. The other one is Trello, which I've always used as my kind of personal to-do list. Well, I wouldn't say I've always used it. I've used it for the last year or so. But what I'm going to begin to do here pretty soon, and I'm setting up the framework, I haven't started doing it yet, is I'm going to start using it with assistants to assign tasks to them and then track the progress. So Trello, you can set up what's called a Kanban board, where there's just this flow that goes left to right and you have different buckets. Like for example, you might have a board that you're going to share with an assistant, and it'll have buckets for the things to do, what's in progress, what's ready for me to review, what I reviewed that has feedback on, what's been edited, what's done. And then for those different tasks, you can create different templates with checklists. Once I get all this built out, this is another thing that would probably be a good idea to deep dive on. So this is all part of me trying to get more efficient and preparing to scale as Fusion Income Fund gets going and some other things. All right, now here's some tools that I'm just looking at and considering right now, but haven't really done much with. One is Slack, which is used for basically team communications. And I've had very limited experience with Slack, but a lot of people I know, especially software developers, really swear by this tool. I haven't used it much, but as I understand it, I think of it as kind of like it's much more than this. I think of it as kind of like an online chat tool, but you can basically have different threads for different conversations, right? So if let's say you've got an assistant and you're talking about loss mitigation efforts on a particular note or an issue with some delinquent taxes, on another note, one of the big problems I've had that I'm trying to combat is when we get into these things, I end up in these long email chains that fill up my email box, and it just drives me nuts. Whereas with Slack, it's kind of an easy way to just move those things off of email. And also when you get into larger teams, it's kind of nice because there can be other conversations going on that you need to be aware of, but you don't really need to be in the middle of it. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to experiment with some more here in the new year. And then the other one is called ClaritySoft. So this is another CRM. So this would be a potential replacement for Pipedrive. And I've actually got a call coming up with one of the reps from ClaritySoft. I had some friends who they're not note investors, they're not even in real estate, but they had recommended ClaritySoft as a CRM because one of the things it does is it has a lot of different functionality with it. So it's not just the CRM, it's got modules for calendar and tracking stuff. It does some email marketing things, and it's supposed to do a little bit of project management type stuff. So this is one I'm going to look at, and stay tuned. If this ends up showing promise, I may talk more about that later. The other one is called Toggl, Toggl, which is a time tracking software. And I haven't done anything with this yet, but I've had a lot of other people recommend this. And one of the main reasons I'm considering this is not that I really need to track time as far as billing or anything like that, but I'm kind of curious to know myself actually how many hours I'm spending on my business and what I'm spending them on. Because if I actually had that map, then that might clue me into some other things I can do to make my business run better. One question I get a lot from people when I talk to them, and especially when they're not real estate related, they go, "Oh, you have this business, you work for yourself. Yeah, how many hours do you work?" I honestly don't know. I know it's a lot. I've always got my laptop. I tend to do stuff early in the morning. I tend to do stuff at night and on the weekends. But I also tend to go to the gym and, hit golf balls and do other stuff. So I'm really not even totally sure how many hours I spend working. I know it's a lot, but I'm not sure how extreme it is. And I also don't know, how much time I'm spending on doing stuff in email, doing stuff on fighting fires, doing stuff on tracking the business and pulling metrics versus doing marketing, building processes and standard operating procedures that are real assets. So that's something I'm looking at doing. I may do an experiment with this for a few weeks. And it can also help us bringing on new assistants, right, to actually track time. Not that I really want to, be big brother to anyone, but it can also be helpful from the standpoint that if I create an standard operating procedure and say, okay, like one of my big ones is the quarterly reports that I send to joint venture investors or joint venture partners. I spend a lot of time doing those. Those quarterly reports are something that most people who do what I do don't. And it's one of the big reasons why people choose to work with me. But I spend a heck of a lot of time on those. And one of the other things I'm working on focusing is improving my processes to be able to get those out more efficiently and actually put more data into them. So if I have assistants helping me with some of that stuff, if I understand how much time they're spending on different tasks, then that can clue me into where certain processes need to be improved or where other ones are just fine as is. So, and then, the final question to you is, what do you use? I'm very curious to hear what other folks out there are using. Because as I spent some time over the holiday break, looking at different tools in these areas, man, I came across just a million different tools in like each of these categories. And it's hard to really even scratch the surface. I think that's why we tend to default on just using kind of what we know. But I'm pretty sure there's some really cool stuff out there that I haven't even heard of before. So if you have any suggestions, drop me a note at dan@fusionnotes.com or leave a comment on one of my videos and let me know. I'd love to hear from you. So, all right. So that's what I've got for you today. That was kind of a long one, but hopefully that was helpful. And if there are any of these two you want me to deep dive in the future, like Pipedrive or other things, I can work on doing that as well. So, all right, until next time, thanks.